Change Your POV podcast is about building confidence in your own beliefs, morals, and opinions while challenging yourself to be open, humble, and curious about things that you are unfamiliar with, don't have experience in, or straight up disagree with.
We will explore concepts and ideas that will challenge you physically, mentally, and spiritually. Personal introspection is among the greatest skill sets you will learn to hone. The foundation of your success is rooted in trust, gratitude, and forgiveness.
So join us as we explore things that we are unfamiliar with, strengthen things that we are, and are always challenging ourselves to become better.
Change Your POV podcast, where perspective is the vantage point of success.
Extreme Ownership. This book is authored by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, two Navy SEAL operators that are now retired. Well, I don't know if they retired or they
Let's get the name right. Leif.
Leif, what did I say?
Leif.
Oh, it is Leif. L-E-I-F, but said Leif, yes.
Yeah.
Leif Babin, yes.
Not Leif.
And
not
so Leif,
like Leif Erikson.
So Leif was a platoon commander in the Navy SEAL teams, which is, if we were to break it down into like Army terminology, that'd be like a platoon leader, right?
Yep.
And Jocko was the task force unit commander, which in, again, Army terms would be equivalent to a company commander, right? At least that's the way I interpret it.
Yeah.
So he's got multiple platoon leaders that report into him with platoons, but I think the rank that he carried, Jocko, in this position was a major.
Yeah, or a oh God, why is that escaping me? Lieutenant commander.
Yeah, lieutenant commander, and I think the platoon commanders were essentially the captain rank.
Yeah,
right?
they were. Yeah, and that's a lieutenant in the Navy.
Right. So where in the Army you've got a captain, company commander, and lieutenant, platoon leader. In the SEAL teams, it sounds like you've got a major that's kind of the company commander and captains running the platoons. Ish, right?
Yep.
And then, of course, you still have the NCO, senior NCO structure, as well as we also did in the Army and the Marine Corps.
Yes.
But it sounds like, and you read the book, and before we dig into it, I want to read the dedication in the preface of the book because it's awesome. But I get the impression, and now it might have been different in the Marine Corps, I don't know, but I got the impression that and again, I don't know if it's true for all of the Navy, but in the SEAL teams anyway, it seemed like the officers had much more of a leadership role than, say, the officers did in the Army. And let me kind of explain what I mean by that. In all of the 10 years of my Army experience, yes, you had officers, you had platoon leaders, you had company commanders, etc. And yes, they carried the rank, so they were, quote, in charge. But in my experience, the majority of the leadership and the decision-making really was within the NCO Corps more than the officer corps. Our platoon sergeant had a lot more say from a leadership standpoint than, say, our platoon leaders. And I don't know if you felt that.
That's from your perspective, I think.
Yep.
So, obviously, everything comes from perspective. So, this is written, Extreme Ownership is written from a officer's perspective. But in the SEAL teams, they're a lot closer. There's more of a team. It's not an us versus them as much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there still is that, obviously. But again, written from a officer's perspective, it's different. For sure.
Yeah. It just, and again, I loved all of the officers that I worked for.
Let's be honest. As a company commander that's the officer that in most of the Army, like you might see your platoon leader, but you don't see him that much. Let's be honest.
Right.
At least
right.
I never really did. I mean, I had relationships with my platoon leaders. Don't get me wrong, but they were always off in some meeting somewhere.
Right. Me too. Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. They were the decision makers.
Yeah, they're more, but they're not part of the day-to-day operational. That's the NCOs, of course.
Yeah.
So that's our perspective, right?
And even when we were deployed in Iraq in combat, I was a senior squad leader and I was out on patrol all the time, and we rotated. Like my platoon sergeant and my platoon leader would rotate. Right. Coming out on the route, but at the end of the day, they were augments to our section, not like the leading force of the section. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah,
I still ran a section and made the decisions. They maintained, quote, command and control and communications back to higher headquarters, but it was just a different experience than what is described in this book.
But I think it's because it's from an officer's perspective, right?
Well, yes, but I think the officers had in the SEAL teams, as described in the book, they had a much more active role in the actual command and control at the ground level, right? Like they were the ones that were.
And I think that is more of a. I think that's because of the nature of their mission.
Yeah, I agree.
And they would come out and the commander. I mean, he was, a lot of times they weren't in the thick of the fighting because they shouldn't be, frankly.
Yeah.
If they have to be, then they have to be. But if not, they need to be in a spot where they can coordinate. Right. Where they can use command and control and see the overall picture.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, and this is why, but you were basically running out of a central base, right? Out of a fob or whatever it was called for you.
Correct.
And you kind of had daily shit that you did. It might have been different because you might have whatever, but you were still going through the same area, right?
Yep.
So they had a whole battle space that they kind of covered, right? So they would go in and out of areas controlled by other units all the time.
Correct.
Like you basically had your area.
Yep.
Not that you did, especially when you were doing escort mission. You had other shit that you had to do, but you had to coordinate with other things and all kind of stuff there. That's a different. So that was more of like what they were doing than just patrols out of a fob.
That's true. And you bring that. Yeah,
Mission.
You bring up a good point. We did have to do quite a bit of convoy escorts or traveling from our AO area operation over to like the green zone or the cache or BIOP or wherever, right? And which required us to travel out of our operating space and travel into adjacent units operating space, and that does require a whole nother level of command and control. But even when we did that, I was the one that managed that command and control, right? Even if I had a lieutenant with me or an officer with me, I was the one that led that patrol, and I was the one that was making that coordination, changing the nets and, entering in and exiting different areas of operations, and the one that was calling back to command and higher headquarters whenever we took contact. And so it just, a lot of what they described in this book from a leadership standpoint, I resonated with because that was a lot of the role that I had in at least from my perspective and in my experience in the Army. So it was just weird to me to listen to this or them describe that level of leadership and execution from an officer standpoint, because even though, yes, officers were our leaders and they were in control and they had the rank and the authority and ultimately the responsibility, a lot of that was conceded over to the non-commissioned officer ranks, I guess.
Right. Got you.
And that's not right or wrong. It's just the way we operated in our structure. Because I was for all intents and purposes, I was a combat observation lasing team squad leader, Colt squad leader, and operated with a platoon of scouts. And forward observers and scouts are trained to very much manage and control their own movement and their own, because we're out in front of the, traditionally training speaking, we're out in front of the flot or forward line of troops. We're in enemy space, and we're out there alone. We don't have officers there with us. So we are the ones that are making the call on the ground, and that's the way we've been trained.
Right.
And so for us, maybe that's if you're in the Army or we're in the Army and you're listening to me and you're like, that's not the way it was when I was in the Army. It could be because it was just the difference in the roles that we had in our military occupational specialty. But as scouts and forward observers, we were very much trained to operate very independently from that officer command and control, I guess.
Totally
so anyway,
get it. Yeah, I mean, it was the same. It was the same when I was in the Marines.
Yeah.
In reconnaissance, because that's all you are. In essence, you're a reconnaissance group.
Yep. So this book is dedicated to Mark Lee, Mike Mansour, and Ryan Job, 3 courageous warriors, SEAL teammates, and friends who valiantly wielded their big machine guns on the mean streets of Ramadi and laid down their lives so that others might live. And there's books and movies and other things out there that you could watch and read and listen to that talk about Mark Lee, Mike Mansour, and Ryan Job, and they're talked about also in this book off and on, because many of the leadership examples that they showcase in this book have a lot to do with their guys, right? Their men as leaders of the SEAL teams. The decisions that they make ultimately impact not only themselves but the men that they lead. So I just wanted to read the full word, and then we can get in. So I think we're really only going to talk about the first and second chapter of the book. And the first chapter is titled Extreme Ownership, and the second chapter is No Bad Teams, Only Bad Leaders. So I'll read the foreword, and then we'll get into it. How's that sound?
Awesome.
All right. So of the many exceptional leaders we served alongside throughout our military careers, the consistent attribute that made them great was that they took absolute ownership, extreme ownership, not only of the things for which they were responsible, but for everything that impacted their mission. These leaders cast no blame. They made no excuses. Instead of complaining about challenges or setbacks, they developed solutions and solved problems. They leveraged assets, relationships, and sources to get the job done. Their own egos took a back seat to the mission and their troops. These leaders truly led. In the years since we left active duty, we have worked through multitudes of business professionals, from senior executives to frontline managers across a vast range of industries, including finance, construction, manufacturing, technology, energy, retail, pharmaceutical, healthcare, and also military, police, fire departments, and emergency first responders. The most successful men and women we've seen in the civilian world practice this same breed of extreme ownership. Likewise, the most successful high-performance teams we've worked with demonstrate this mindset throughout their organizations. Since the publication of Extreme Ownership, we've heard from readers across the United States and around the world whose lives have been strongly impacted for good. They've told us how implementing these principles changed their lives and made them better. A more productive employee, a more supportive spouse, or a more engaging parent. Once people stop making excuses, stop blaming others, and take extreme ownership of everything in their lives, they are compelled to take action to solve their problems. They are better leaders, better followers, more dependable and actively contributing team members, and more skilled and in aggressively driving toward mission accomplishment. but they're also humble, able to keep their egos from damaging relationships and adversely impacting the mission and the team. And I got to take a quick stop right, man. I got to highlight that section. And I'll explain why I'm highlighting in this book in a minute. But I got to highlight that. We've heard countless stories about how applying these combat leadership principles have helped readers accomplish what others or even they themselves had previously thought impossible. Extreme ownership has helped people all over the world launch a successful company or nonprofit, receive major promotions, land a better job with greater responsibility and more opportunity for growth, hit numbers far beyond expectations, achieve special recognition as an exceptional team member, or accomplish their goals, whatever they may be. Every day we hear stories from different people, different businesses, and different industries. The details change, the characters are diverse. There are always slight differences in the way things unfold, but their outcomes are ultimately the same. Quote, "I can't believe how well that works," is a common response. The principles are simple, but they are not easy. How many times have we said that?
A billion.
Right. Taking ownership for mistakes and failures is hard, but doing so is key to learning, to developing solutions, and ultimately to victory. Those successfully implement these principles run circles around the rest of the world. Since the release of extreme ownership, the fundamental principles of combat leadership that we have learned on the battlefield of Iraq have been exposed to, understood, and implemented by hundreds of thousands of readers around the world. We've worked with thousands more individuals through our leadership consulting business, Echelon Front, and reach a vast audience on social media. We've been fortunate to receive feedback from many of them on a daily basis. Their responses have been incredible. We've heard from readers who call this book, quote, life-changing, quote, the best leadership book I've ever read, and exactly what I need to hear. They explain how they have learned even more on the second, third, or fourth read through the book. There can be no higher compliment to us as authors than to observe the scores of extreme ownership copies that we have signed with multiple colored tabs marking well underlined, highlighted, and dog-eared pages with scribbled notes in the margins, and serve as a testament to the book's frequent use as a ready reference guide for engaged leaders navigating the challenges of business and life. Such testimonials and observations inspire us to work even harder ourselves. But what's been even more gratifying is to hear about the results. We get reports from military leaders on the front lines putting these principles to work against our nation's enemies. These are our leading up of the chain of command to receive the green light for approval to launch on critical battlefield missions or utilize crucial resources. Chief executive officers of massive global companies detail how they have initiated extreme ownership in their organizations and observed their personnel throughout the chain of command to help them step up and lead. We hear from first responders who utilize these lessons from extreme ownership in their official training programs to lead their troops in stressful and dangerous situations. All of their stories have reinforced what we have learned in the SEAL teams. Leadership is the most important thing on the battlefield, and the principles of good leadership do not change regardless of the mission, the environment, or the personalities of those involved. Leading is leading. We worked with the division of construction company that faced the grim possibility of shutdown due to systemic safety problems. But once its employees implemented extreme ownership, the division not only solidified their right to operate, but it also earned a top position in the safety at the company. We've helped companies streamline their manufacturing process, make deadlines on the delivery of product, and complete vast projects on time and under budget. We've guided young, capable, eager leaders struggling in agnostic relationships with their bosses to implement the mindset of no excuses and no one else is to blame. By taking ownership, checking their egos, and accepting the blame for a difficult relationship, they repaired relationships and regained the trust of their leaders. As a result, they achieved recognition above their peers and throughout their industry for exceptional performances. We've heard from leaders in the medical profession who tell us how explaining the why to their team and communicating orders in a simple, clear, and concise manner greatly enhanced their team's performance and saved lives in the operating room. We've watched fire department battalion training chiefs utilize extreme ownership as a handbook, teaching their firefighters to implement cover and move, to better function as a team, enabling them to more effectively serve their communities while better protecting their firefighters in harm's way. We've seen police officers promoted into leadership positions of greater authority and responsibility attribute their success directly to the principles of extreme ownership. A number of school teachers, educators, and coaches have told us how these concepts of this book have made them better, delivering greater impact and improving their lives of their students and athletes. Pastors and mission groups have relayed to us how extreme ownership made their teams more effective, delivering greater impact to the lives of people in need. We've heard from spouses tell us how extreme ownership saved their marriage. Once they stopped pointing fingers and casting blame on their wives or husbands, they were able to look inwardly at what they could take ownership of to produce a better outcome. As a result, the relationships were repaired and strengthened. To see such far-reaching, extraordinary impact is deeply meaningful to us. We wrote this book to truly help others, leaders, and aspire leaders to be better, to lead more successful and fulfilling lives, become more engaged and effective people, to have a greater impact for good on everyone around them. Helping others live better lives is also a way for us to honor the legacy and heritage of those we've served with in combat who gave their last full measure. We owe them everything. We believe in these principles because we have witnessed their extraordinary results, not only on the battlefield but also in the business and in life. We look forward to watching these messages continue to spread far and wide and to see the mindset of extreme ownership continue to enable every leader, every follower, and every person to become even more effective and fulfill their ultimate purpose, lead and win. Get after it. And that's by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, July 2017. So that, in a nutshell, without us trying to explain the kind of the meaning and purpose of this book, I think that forward does the best job possible of helping those that have never read the book understand really the purpose behind the book. Yeah.
It's pretty self-explanatory. It's one of the things I like about this book is it's, there's not a lot up to interpretation other than your own opinion and experience, right? Yep. The rest of it is pretty spot on.
Now, when I originally recommended that you read this book, Bennett, what were your thoughts? Were you like another Navy SEAL book?
No, because okay. the book, it was published originally in 2015, right?
Yeah.
And I knew about it then. It's just one of those books that's been on my list, and I don't know, man. I just never pulled the trigger. Yeah. I guess it's because it wasn't the right time for me, maybe. I don't know.
Right.
But, frankly, I've been having issues with my teenage daughters. And I've thrown everything in the book at it.
Yeah.
To try and help with the behavior, right?
Yep.
Now, needless to say, my kids are great to the outside world. Just like every other kid, right?
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Now, no, and this is the reality. And this is what I'm kind of splitting hairs here as a father because I want to give my kids the best, So I want to set them up for success. So just to digress a little bit, that Jocko has a podcast too.
Yeah. Right.
So he had, is it Jason Gardner? Another SEAL.
Yeah.
Command Master Chief. You know, hold on. I'm going to look because I want to get it right. And it was... Yeah, I think it's... What the hell? Yeah, Jason Gardner. I'm pretty sure that's his name because for some reason it won't. It's not showing up. Jason Gardner, who now works for Echelon Front as well. Yeah, there it is. Jason Gardner. Works for Echelon Front as well, right? Which is, so you explain that too, what Echelon Front is.
Yep. It's consulting agency.
Forward,
yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So he wrote a promises to his daughter and ended the last episode, which is episode 179 of the Jocko podcast, right? And ended the episode with a promises to his daughter, which you can go check out. It's pretty awesome. And I'm not going to read them. I don't think I need to. But promises to my daughter, because I have, as most people know, I have 4 of them. 3 of them that live at home, though. And they are ages 14, 13, 10. Damn, son.
Yeah.
So the promises, you know, I've just been trying to get them so they'll take ownership of their shit, because this is a problem. They're always pointing the fingers at each other, yada, yada, yada. So after the promises to the daughter, I was like, shit, I need to take ownership, right? Because this is me. Like, I see like in 2 of my daughters, I see me. I see exactly how I created that shit. You know what I mean? Like the way that they are is because of me.
Yeah.
In essence, I'm taking ownership for their thing. Now, needless to say, out in the real world, it's a testament to my wife and I's raising, because they hold it together. They have good grades, blah, blah. You know what I mean? They're upstanding citizens in public. But as you know, that takes a lot of energy to hold it together, right?
Yeah.
Especially for a teenage girl in society where too often people just lose it and flip out, right? I mean, this is why you have kids that lash out in school. My kids aren't those kids. They're very polite. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. This, that, and the other thing, for the most part, right? And I know this because I hear from other parents and other people.
And you're like, wait, are we talking about the same
No,
kids?
but I know. But see, that's kind of the point, right? So you want your kids to be able to do that. I mean, you want them to be themselves, but they also have to play the game.
Yep. Right.
And that's what it comes down to. So what I'm trying to do now is fix because what happens is they've used up all their I give a fucks at school and dealing with other people. And when they get home, they're like, all they want to do is relax. Mm-hmm. But that's not reality, right? We have things that we have to do. A household has to run. Mom and dad can't do it all because as you and I have talked about, I don't live for my kids. I just don't. I see that as an incorrect way of looking at the world. The 2 most important people in the relationship are mom and dad. Because that's the center. Too often I think people live for their children and they do everything for them and they give them everything and they everything they do is for them when I think that's backwards. And I'm not saying that the kids need to be, but your job is to set the example, right? And that's what I feel like I was lacking to an extent, is I had digressed to a point where I would yell because I didn't know what else to do. So reading this book is actually, for me, started as a parenting tool. It's a long-winded way to get around to that, but as a parenting tool for me. Now, of course, it translates into business, and I go, oh, shit, man, what the hell? You know, so you see
right,
things.
yeah.
So you see things, you're like, whoop, failed there. Hardcore. But it's very learning center. I mean, I listened to it, but I also read it.
Right, me too.
Have a copy to highlight because it's a reference book. It's not just a book.
Yep.
So anyway, that was a long-winded way of saying this started for me as a parenting tool.
And I think, and that's the thing, is you and I think we're fairly good when it comes to self-reflection, introspection, or self-awareness, right? Like, you and I are pretty good identifying our strengths and weaknesses, our shortcomings, and actively pursue ways to get better, right? So whenever I'm approached with a self-help book, or for lack of a better term, I'm not skeptical, but I'm like, I'm kind of wondering, what am I going to end up getting or learning out of the book that I don't already know, right? Because I feel like I know myself pretty well. But then I read this book, and I was like, damn, there was a lot about different aspects.
You're like, I suck.
Right? So, yeah. So it was a wake-up call for me, because it definitely exposed a lot of different things about me that I thought I was aware of, and it turns out I maybe not. I wasn't as self-aware as I perhaps thought I was.
Well, it's literally like, we've already got, this is just an analogy, we've already got a pretty good, what the hell are those called? Jesus. Magnifying glass.
Yeah.
We have you and I, for ourselves, we have a magnifying glass. But what this book does, it makes you look under a microscope.
There you go. That's a perfect example. Yeah,
right?
That's a perfect way of describing it.
It's and because you can't look at the whole picture from a microscope, but what you have to be able to do is flow in and out of that, right? So you have to look at it big picture and then magnify it down with the magnifying glass. And then this book, what it did, it's just going to make us more effective humans,
right?
Leaders, parents, I mean, again, parents should be leaders of their home. And unfortunately, I don't think that's always the case nowadays.
No,
and that's kind of what I'm fighting back against. And that's why this is such a good book for that.
So we're talking about the first two chapters. Extreme Ownership is chapter 1, and There Are No Bad Teams, Only Bad Leaders is chapter 2. Do you have anything from the book that you want to read, and then kind of use that as a way to preface a story or an example about what you're talking about here, either in your personal life or work? Or how do you want to dissect these two chapters?
I'm not sure. Okay.
So I'll go first then, and then let you kind of think about it. So and that's kind of the signature point of this book is each chapter, they alternate. So Jocko has written a chapter, and then Leif writes a chapter, and they kind of alternate throughout the book. And if you ever listen to the audiobook, it's actually read by both Jocko and Leif. So it's really good. So if you like his podcast, which I highly recommend, listening to the audiobook is very similar.
Yeah, very much. I guess the one thing that always hit me, obviously the stories are great, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of when they go to the principal, right?
The principal, right.
This is why I like, one of the things I like about the setups of this book is they'll tell the story, that they're trying to say. And then, I mean, what it comes down to with this first chapter is he's just laying out what extreme ownership is, right? So literally the first paragraph of the principle is probably one of the most important paragraphs in this whole book.
Agreed.
You know, so I don't know if you want me to read it or when the time comes.
Yeah, so I'll tell my story and then read. So basically, they'll tell a story, a combat story of their time in Ramadi, Iraq,
or a story of working with a company,
right? And then they'll have like a principle, and then they'll describe how that story relates to the topic of the chapter. So it's so a lot of people listening, if you've never served in the military and you're unfamiliar with military and how things, like, don't worry, this book is totally for you too, because you don't have to have a lot of experience, military experience, to get the benefit of this book. But what it does is it takes these concepts and it breaks it down, and it helps describe how you can apply it or how it's been applied to either your life or business. So here's a quick story. So that sentence that I highlighted in the foreword, I had to stop and highlight it, and I'm going to tell you the story here why. So I work in procurement, so I'm a procurement manager, and I've got some folks that work for me that work on a lot of different projects, right? Procurement projects. And we recently were pulled into a project, probably later in the project than it should have been. We probably should have been pulled in much sooner. But anyway, so one of the projects was to source some items that we need for the company for an upcoming event, right? And the cost of these items was probably in the $250,000 range. And one of the folks that works for me was I tasked her with kind of being in front of the project, and she's really knowledgeable, really good in this space. You know, knows how to send things out to bid and to quote, you know, submit RFPs, collect the data, like all of that, right? I mean, that's what we do. That's our job. But there was another lady within the organization that was very close to the project, you know, from a non-procurement standpoint, and it got to the point where there was some jockeying for position on this project between the lady that works for me and this other lady within the company, right? And you know, we've all been there, right? You want to be you kind of, if you're given a project, you want to lead it, you want to take charge of it, because at the end of the day, it comes with, you know, some level of recognition and some spotlight, you know, a little limelight, and that's never a bad thing, right? If you're doing something within your work, you want the opportunity to shine. You want the opportunity to showcase your capabilities and get your name out there. It isn't a prideful thing. I think it's just, you know, I mean, you want to be able to show and demonstrate to people what you are capable of. I think everybody wants to do that. They want to do a good job, and they want to show, you know, the decision makers at the company or seniors or even peers, you know, what they're capable of. And so the lady that works for me, she very much was looking forward to that aspect of this project. It's a high visibility project, a lot of influence, a lot of, you know, all the way at the top of the organization, visibility. And that's, I mean, quite frankly, that's one of the reasons why I put her on the project, because I knew that it was going to be a high visible project. I knew she would do a good job with it, so I wanted to give her the opportunity to kind of shine. Now, could I have taken this project and just kept it mine and you know, garnered all of the limelight and showcased my capabilities? Yeah, I absolutely could have done that. But I've done that enough on other things, so I wanted to give, this was an opportunity as a manager to give my employees the opportunity to do that. So that's why I put her in front of this project. And then as the project started to progress, I started to see this battle of will and ego, I guess, between the lady that works for me and this other lady within the organization. And because it's such a high visible project, I knew that my employee was at risk, right, of the battle of the wills, the battle of the egos, taking a turn for the worse, and instead of giving her a position of limelight to showcase her capabilities, this could easily backfire and turn into something negative that, would hurt her career more than help her career. And so I pulled her aside and I said, you're doing a great job on this project, but I'm noticing that there is this struggle of will and ego between you and this other lady, because you both are kind of jockeying for the same position. And at the end of the day, there can only be one rider on a horse, right? No matter how good the horse, there can only be one rider on the horse. Because if you try to put two riders, both riders could be really, really good. You could be champions in your own right, but you put two riders on the horse, and not only are you not going to win, but you run the risk of running the horse into the ground and killing the horse, killing yourselves, and just making things really horrible. And that's really what I started to see happening. And I gave her my coaching, my guidance, my recommendations, and I said, as much as you want to be in the forefront of this project, my recommendation is for you to concede, your power and authority in this project. Still stay on the project, but stay on in a more of a supportive role as opposed to a leading role, right? And let the other person kind of run with it. Because at the end of the day, the other person that was kind of rubbing up against her it has a direct line to the president of the company. We don't, right? We can, by all means, we can have access to the president, but at the end of the day, this person has a direct line communication to the president of the company. So I was like, no matter how good you are or how right your decisions may be, we don't have that level of influence to the president as this other person does. And so by just that, but just knowing that element of relationship leverage that the other person has, that automatically puts us in the passenger seat, not the driver's seat. And that's how I explained it to her. And she was understandably not happy about conceding that position on the project, because it took something that she was really looking forward to kind of out of her hands and just kind of turning it over to somebody else. And it seemed unfair and it seemed not right. And I agree, and maybe it wasn't fair, but you know what? Just because it's not fair doesn't make it less true, right?
Absolutely.
And it got to the point I was in Atlanta all last week on business travel, and the owner of so this was a sourcing event. So we had a couple of suppliers that we were looking at sourcing this product from that would cost about $250,000. And one of the companies that we sent a bid out to ended up giving me a call on my cell phone while I was in Atlanta. And I talked to him, and at the end of the day, what ended up happening is the supplier that called me lost the business, and it went to the other company that this person that was in this jockeying position with my employee wanted to go with, right? So she had it in her mind that's basically who she wanted to go with, and right, wrong, or indifferent, the decision was made to go with the other company, right? And so anyway, I'm talking to the president of this company that lost a $250,000 business. And I was trying to explain to him, in the best way I knew how, kind of the circumstances around it without, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. I'm just saying, hey, it is what it is. This is kind of what happened. And, they're still a preferred supplier. They still do a lot of business with us. It's not like they just lost this one project. They didn't lose all of our business, right?
Right.
But still, I mean, $250,000 is still a $250,000 business that you lose, right? So, and I was, doing my job as a procurement manager to discuss, what happened and, what we're doing as an organization and putting some rationalization around it. And all of it was true. I wasn't making anything up, but I was trying to smooth out the edges, I guess. And then we got towards the end of the conversation, and he made a comment, and he said, he goes, to be honest with you, Eddie, he goes, I really feel like and this had nothing to do with anything that I told him. This must have been an observation that he had throughout this whole process. He says, Eddie, you know what, to be honest with you, I feel like the issue that, my employee and this other employee had with each other, that rub ended up at the end of the day costing him a $250,000 business. And he, you know what, he might be right, right? He might be right. The struggle, that ego battle that was happening between our two associates, one of them working for me, might have resulted in. Now again, there was always the chance that he would have lost the business either way, right? So it wasn't like if there wasn't a conflict, he would have won the business kind of a thing. But it's like, if there wasn't a conflict, he would have at least had a better opportunity to have won the business, right? And that's how he felt. And again, perception is reality. And that's really when I got to the part of the forward that I had to highlight. It talks about, talking about leaders, they are better leaders, better followers, more dependable and actively contributing team members, and more skilled in aggressively driving forward mission accomplishment. And here's the part that I highlighted. But they're also humble, able to keep their egos from damaging relationships and adversely impacting the mission and the team. And that is so true. I think egos got in the way, and as a result, I think relationships were damaged. And as a result of that, I think that there was the mission was adversely impacted. And so that is the new reality that I live with. And now I got to go back to work on Monday, and I need to sit down with my employee and say, here's kind of the truth. Here's your new reality, right? You've been given an opportunity to really shine and be visible on this project, and maybe because egos got a little bit in the way and relationships got damaged. Because the reason the owner of this company called me was because he had an appointment with our president in our corporate headquarters that day, and he was on his way to go meet with my president, and he just wanted to talk to me before he went into his office to kind of get a little bit of the background, a little bit of the story. And, so what he did, he went and met with that. Now, what was said behind closed doors, I don't know. Is it possible that my employee's name was brought up in conversation about his frustration in this deal? Perhaps. I don't know, right? So, and I know I'm talking in very generalities because at the end of the day, I owe it to my employee and in my business to not divulge details and specifics, but I wanted to share at least the general concept of a real case in point here, right? These are the decisions that we live with and we make all day long. And sometimes we make the right decisions and they go our way. Sometimes we make the wrong decisions and we got to live with them. But at the end of the day, it's about taking ownership, right?
Yeah.
And just this happened, but the relationship is now strained a bit. And so now I've got to coach my employee about rebuilding relationship, not only with the supplier, but we got to rebuild relationship with that other employee of the company, right? Because they're an important person in the roles that we perform. And really, and at the end of the day, if I were to sum up the story into one thing, it is ego got the best of both of them.
Oh, yeah.
And as a result, both of their names are now tied to that ego struggle.
Yep.
And I think, there's plenty of blame to go around, but this book teaches you about the most important thing, and that is taking extreme ownership for your part in it. So, and again, there was more than one ego involved in this equation, but the only ego that my employee can control is her own.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
And this is a lesson, and unfortunately, it came at a price of $250,000 one way or the other. But money is money, and money comes and goes. But what lasts forever is reputation, right? And that's harder. The reputation is harder to mend and repair, and it takes longer than a bad deal, right? Or a deal that didn't go your way. And because attached with reputation is trust, is confidence, is openness, candidness. There's so many factors that are impacted by one's ability to maintain trust in a relationship and maintaining your what's the word I was looking for? Your reputation, right? Your reputation can be damaged it takes a long time to build a positive reputation, but it doesn't take very long to destroy it.
No, it takes a moment.
A moment.
And it's rough. That's rough.
Yeah.
But it's the truth, And see, something I want to point out too is people have a hard time with this because the enemy of it all is really ego, right?
Yeah.
When it comes down to it. When you boil it all down, ego is the enemy, which is a whole nother book, literally.
Yeah, sure.
But it just really is. And we're all guilty of it. But ego is just, man, not necessarily a good thing. There's a time and place for it, but it's not, especially if you, let me read this. Okay. What it comes down to, the principle of this section is on any team, in any organization, all responsibility for success and failure rests with the leader. The leader must own everything in his or her world. There is no one else to blame. The leaders must acknowledge mistakes and admit failures, take ownership of them, and develop a plan to win.
Yeah, and in this example, I am the leader here.
Yeah,
right?
So now you know that you have to go into work and you have to, come up with a plan to either, on multiple fronts, you have to come up with a plan, right?
Yep.
And one of them is going to have to be like educating your employee, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And have conversations, hard conversations with people.
Yeah.
It's a very delicate situation you're in here, sir.
It is. And because I don't want to destroy her willingness to participate in future projects, right? That's not the goal here. I don't want her to feel defeated and, but at the same time, I can't give her a pass either, right? She has to own this herself, but I have to own it as the ultimate leader here.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm responsible now for ensuring that relationships are repaired and mended, and more importantly, that things are done differently next time.
Yeah, going forward.
Right. You can't change the past, right? And that's and whenever I provide any feedback to my people, we look at the past as an opportunity to learn, but we don't look at the past as an opportunity to change, because you can't change the past. What happened, happened. You can't go back in time and change it. But what we could do is we can look forward and say, okay, next time.
Right, and you can change future outcomes.
You can change future behavior. Absolutely. So you look at past behavior as a way to influence future behavior. But you don't look at past behavior and punish past behavior because it's in the past, right? It's let's look at what happened and let's dissect it. Let's take a moment and reflect on the event, right? Where did it start out? How did it start out? Where did it start out? And then where did it start to go south? What were some indicators? What are some red flags? Hindsight, we always say hindsight's 20/20, right? And it is. It truly is. Monday morning quarterbacking is the best kind of quarterback, right? You can always look back and say, oh, I would have done this different, or if I was in that position, I wouldn't have made that decision, or right. So hindsight's 20/20, and now that we know that, let's use that to our advantage. Let's replay this gameplay. Let's look at the game.
Let's have an after action review.
Yeah,
let's have an AAR, whatever you want to call it. And see, that's what we call them in the military.
Yep.
After a mission, you do what's called an after action review, and you go through what went down, and each person tells their part.
Yep.
Good, bad, or ugly.
Yep.
God, I've had AARs,
and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for those decision moments, right? So that's the exercise that we're going to have, next week when I go back to work. Is let's go back to the game footage here in our minds, and let's play it out. Let's draw it out on the whiteboard, even if we have to. And what I'm most interested in is those decision points that, and again, very rarely, when something goes bad, whether it be in our work, in our lives, in our personal life, professional lives, whenever something really goes south, very rarely is it as a result of a single thing, right? It's generally a culmination of a bunch of things, or a series of things that lead up to it, right? And so that's how I'm going to approach this. Let's look at the project. We know where we started and we know where we are today. So we started good, we ended not so good. Now let's kind of replay this on this timeline of events, and let's try to identify some key indicators that if we experience those going forward, they'll become more, relevant in our forefront. So what was the first point in this project where you felt like there was an ego struggle between you and this other lady? Let's talk about that. What was a point in this project where you felt like you were losing a little bit of control, but were still trying to pose a position of authority in this role or in this project, right? So those are the key points that I want to be able to identify and really talk about those key decision points, because we are never going to end up in the exact same project under the exact same circumstances going forward, right? We're never going to be dealing with this sourcing project with these vendors ever again, right? That's why they call them projects. Projects have a definitive beginning, a definitive end. It's never been done before. It's the whole definition of a project. So it's not like we're talking about, the next time we do a project just like this. That's not. I'm talking about the next time we do a project of any kind. Those triggers, those moments of feelings or ego or whatever it was that led up to the overall failure in the long run.
Yeah.
The breakdown. Let's identify those moments, those points of failure, right? When a plane crashes and they do the investigation, they generally can tie it back to something really, really incremental, very small, that then led to a bigger problem, that led to a bigger problem, that led to a bigger problem, that finally resulted in a catastrophic failure and brought the plane down and killed everybody on board, right? Killing everybody on board part, we can't prevent. We can prevent that little washer that came loose that ended up in the engine, that ended up, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's where I'm interested in really identifying. But in order to have those hard conversations, you have to you have to come at it from a position of extreme ownership, right? Because in any case, if you're looking at ways to deflect or defer ownership or responsibility for your actions onto something or someone else, then you're never going to be able to come at it from a position of extreme ownership. And that's really where the beauty lies, in your ability to change and become more self-aware and being cognizant of your own strengths and weaknesses. In the very first chapter, Extreme Ownership, Jocko tells a story about a blue on blue, and that's basically, that's fratricide. That's when U.S. military and coalition forces end up accidentally killing each other, right? And he had a case in the Malab district of Ramadi of Iraq where there was an instance of blue on blue, and members of his SEAL team ended up
almost.
No, they ended up killing one of the Iraqi soldiers.
Oh yeah, but that wasn't. Was that? Oh yeah, because yes, you're right.
Yeah,
man, I forgot that there was one of the Iraqis died.
Yeah,
because they because yeah, and again, it's extreme ownership, but it's just for context. Didn't the conventional forces attack the SEALs because they thought they were? They thought they were bad, but then the SEAL team didn't, or the SEAL. The sniper Overwatch didn't communicate that they had moved.
Right. You want me to read this?
No. We don't have to go into it. It's pretty long. But yes, the blue on blue. This is the turning point though, where extreme ownership is kind of invented.
Yeah.
To an extent, right? Is that at the end of the day, after the going through all the briefs or going through all the investigation, going through all the evidence, Jocko just had this nagging feeling in his gut that was like, who's to blame here?
Well, that's what he said. He goes, "A day passed as I waited for the arrival of the investigation officer, or our CO, and Command Master Chief, or CMC, the senior enlisted SEAL at the command. In the meantime, they directed me to prepare a briefing detailing what had happened. I knew what this meant. They were looking for someone to blame, and most likely someone to relieve, the military euphemism for someone to fire. Frustrated, angry, and disappointed that this had happened, I began gathering information. As we debriefed, it was obvious there was some serious mistakes made by many individuals, both during the planning phase and on the battlefield during execution. Plans were altered, but notifications weren't sent. The communication plan was ambiguous, and confusion about the specific timing of radio procedures contributed to critical failures. The Iraqi army had adjusted their plans but had not told us. Timelines were pushed without clarification. Locations of friendly forces had not been reported. The list went on and on. Within Task Force Unit Bruiser, my own SEAL troop, similar mistakes had been made. The specific location of the sniper team in question had not been passed on to other units. Positive identification of the assumed enemy combatants, who turned out to be an Iraqi soldier, had been insignificant or insufficient. A thorough SITREP, or situation report, had not been passed to me after the initial engagement took place. The list of mistakes was substantial. As directed, I put together a Microsoft PowerPoint presentation with timelines and depictions of the movements of friendly units on the map of the area. Then I assembled the list of everything that everyone had done wrong. It was through explanation of what had happened. It outlined the critical failures that had turned the mission into a nightmare and cost the life of one Iraqi soldier, wounded several more, but for a true miracle could have cost several of our SEALs' lives. But something was missing. There was some problem, some piece that I hadn't identified, and it made me feel like the truth wasn't coming out. Who was to blame? He questioned. I reviewed my brief again and again, trying to figure out the missing piece, the single point of failure that had led to the incident. But there were so many factors I couldn't figure it out. Finally, the CO and the CMC and the investigating officer arrived at our base. They were going to drop their gear, grab some food at the chow hall, and then we would begin bringing everyone together to debrief the event. I looked through my notes again, trying to place the blame. Then it hit me. Despite all of the failures of the individuals, the units, the leaders, and despite the myriad mistakes that had been made, there was only one person to blame for everything that had gone wrong from this operation: me. I hadn't been with our sniper team that they were engaging the Iraqi soldier. I hadn't been controlling the rogue element of the Iraqis and entering the compound, but it didn't matter. As the SEAL Task Unit Commander, the senior leader on the ground, in charge of the mission, I was responsible for everything at Task Unit Bruiser. I had to take complete ownership of what went wrong. That is what a leader does.
Yeah.
Even if it means getting fired, even if anyone was to blame and fired for what happened, let it be me.
So I totally agree. It's amazing, right? But the point that I need to make, and this is a point that some people, God, I don't want to scold people. People can use this as an excuse, right? He does bring this up. People can use this as an excuse, but just because your leader takes extreme ownership of a situation doesn't mean you're any less culpable for your part.
Doesn't mean you're absolved of it.
You're not absolved
Right.
of any
Yes.
wrongdoing, even, you know what I mean? Just because someone else takes extreme ownership doesn't mean you're absolved from your part in it. And that's a point that
I think that's
that I have to make, because
I think that's the difference between ownership and extreme ownership, right?
Yes, right.
What he's describing here of taking ownership because he was the leader, that's ownership, right?
Right.
I think extreme ownership is for everyone all the way up and down that chain of command.
Yes, and that's a good point.
To take their own ownership. And if everyone takes their own ownership, that becomes extreme ownership in my mind, right?
As individuals, we often attribute the success of others to luck or circumstances and make excuses for our own failures and the failures of our team. We blame on our poor performance on bad luck, circumstances beyond our control, our poorly performing subordinates, anyone but ourselves. Total responsibility for failure is a difficult thing to accept, and take ownership when things go wrong requires extraordinary humility and courage. But doing just that is an absolute necessity to learning, growing as a leader, and improving a team's performance. Extreme ownership requires leaders to look at an organization's problems through an objective lens of reality without emotional attachments to agendas or plans. It mandates that a leader set ego aside, accept responsibility for failures, attack weaknesses, and consistently work to build a better and more effective team. Such a leader, however, does not take credit for his or her team's successes, but bestows that honor upon his subordinate leaders and team members. When a leader sets such an example and expects this from junior leaders within the team, the mindset develops into the team's culture at every level. With extreme ownership, junior leaders take charge of their smaller teams and their piece of the mission. Efficiency and effectiveness increase exponentially, and a high performance winning team is the result. So it, again, taking extreme ownership starts with you as a leader. It has to, because then it's infectious.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it's not like I can have a meeting with my employee and sit down with her and say, okay,
here's what's going to happen.
Now, yeah, here's what's going to happen. You're going to take extreme ownership of this situation.
Right. It doesn't work that way. Right.
No, it doesn't.
No, and trust me, with my instances and with my children, it's like you want them to just get it. Like, that's what you want, but that's not what's going to happen ever, because they have to buy into the process too. And sooner or later they will, but mindless repetition and blunt force trauma.
That's right.
It's the ways that we learned. We've said this millions of times, and that's no different with this. Mm-hmm. So, again, the mindless repetition is you being consistent.
And the other book that these guys, these two wrote, is another book called The Dichotomy of Leadership. Now, and we're going to get into it a little bit later. If we are going to be looking at each of these chapters over the course of the next few episodes ish, we'll eventually get to the dichotomy of leadership, which is the last chapter of the book. But I just want to kind of share that concept with you here in this story, right? So here's the dichotomy of leadership, right? The dichotomy of leadership, and there's basically, you could call it the dichotomies of life. Everything that we do in life, there's dichotomies, there's opposing forces, and both are right and both may be wrong depending on the situation or circumstance. So here's the dichotomy of leadership. If I were to do this all over again, I would have preferred that my employee would have made different choices in dealing with the situation and would have done a better job of checking ego and putting relationships before her willingness to and desire to shine in the light of this project, right? I think that's really, if I were to boil it down, I think her desire to shine outweighed her desire to build relationship, right? I think ultimately that's kind of the breakdown, right? So if I had my way and we could go back in time, I would, hop in that time machine with the flux capacitor or whatever the hell it is, and have her do things differently. However, the dichotomy here is the way we grow and we learn is through a culture of being secure in our ability to make mistakes, right? Because if I run my department and I leave no opportunities or room for my employees' abilities to make mistakes and learn from them, then what I've done is I've stifled innovation. I've removed my team's ability to think independently, to make decisions on their own, and it turns more into a dictatorship and less of a collaborative environment. And so I have to, as a leader, I have to foster an environment within my team of it's okay to make decisions, it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay. We all reserve the right to get better, right? And if we all reserve the right to get better, we must also reserve the right to make mistakes without punitive action, right? Because if I punish my people every time they made a mistake, guess what? They will do everything they can to avoid making mistakes, which then could ultimately impede our ultimate ability to be successful and to innovate. And so that's the dichotomy, right? I need to cultivate that culture of a safe place to work and to thrive and to grow and to learn and to innovate. But I also want my folks to make the right decisions and make sure that their egos don't get in their own way.
Yeah.
And that's the dichotomy. And that's my responsibility as the leader, right? Now I have to take extreme ownership and make sure that I find that balance, to make sure that I preserve the sanctity of both ends of that spectrum.
Yep. I mean, this comes up later in the book too, with the concept of discipline equals freedom.
Right. Yes.
And as teams and organizations, whether it's family, business, whatever, you have to have standard operating procedures, right? Mm-hmm. You just do. Well, you don't have to, but usually shit goes sideways then, right? So even families need SOPs. So I don't want to delve too deeply into this because this is a later chapter. But
but you bring up a good point. SOPs set the baseline of expectation.
Correct. And that's the thing. This is one of those instances that this book brings to light. Now it's something that I've always practiced, but it just reinforces the extreme ownership ideas is that oh my God, I just lost it. Are you fucking kidding me? My head. I just lost my point. Gone. Dude, this is what happens when you get old. Fuck.
You were talking about the you were talking about
you don't even fucking remember.
No, you were talking about the discipline equals freedom.
Yeah. Oh God. I think it's gone. I think it's like
well, let me explain my thoughts on this,
okay.
Right? And again, we're going to talk about discipline equals freedom later. But me and my team, we operate in this concept of this idea called freedom within the framework. And it's the same principle. It's the same idea. Freedom within the framework basically says this, and I like to talk in analogies because I'm a very visual learner, so people can associate what I'm the best way to describe what's in my head is through pictures, so people can understand. So in my mind, freedom in the framework says this, we're all going to play a game. 'Cause you go to work, guess what? You're playing a game. You go home with your family, you're playing a game. Everyone's playing the game, right?
Yep.
Some players are better than other players, but at the end of the day, if we all agree that everywhere we go and everything we do, we're all part of a game, all right? The idea here is, okay, so if we all recognize the fact that we're playing a game, then let's make sure that we're playing on a game field. So let's call it a football field, right? So now we've got, the boundaries. You got your left limit, you got your right limit, and you got your end zones on either end. So we've defined now the playing field. Mm-hmm. So if we're all playing a game, we all know where out of bounds is. That's the limit, right? It's called freedom within the framework. So you're now on the field with limits. But then, now that we all are playing on the same field, and we all understand and recognize where our left and right limits are, where our end zones are, and we're contained within that field, now we can start developing our SOPs, which are our rules, right? You're going to stand on this side of the ball. I'm going to stand on this side of the ball, and and your rules start to get more and more granular as you go. But as the game progresses, there's a lot of movement that happens on that field, right? People are going left, they're going right, they're going up, they're going down. The game proceeds. And so you could do a whole lot. There's a lot of plays that you can do both offensively and defensively on this field. But at the end of the day, everyone agrees that they have to stay on the field and they're playing with a certain set of rules.
Right, yeah.
And that's freedom within the framework. We're not telling you how to play it. We're not telling you where to go within that framework. We're just saying, here's the framework. And you
this
have
is
freedom
society
within it.
at large too.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the culture that I'm trying to develop on my team is let's set the boundaries, let's set the limits, but you guys have freedom within those. Freedom within the framework is the term that we use. But essentially it's the same thing. It's discipline equals freedom, because the more you understand what the game is, how the game is played, and the more discipline you impose on yourself
on the
and
basic
those around,
things.
On the basic things, it gives you some freedom, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, like an example real quick. Like at my house, one of the issues that we're running into is people picking up their own shit, people picking up their own messes, right? Mm-hmm. And we have basic expectations like making your bed, picking up your clothes, putting away your clothes after you do laundry, putting your backpacks where they belong, putting your shoes where they belong, shit like that, right? Because if you don't, it's chaos, mm-hmm. right? So, and I use this example with my kids is like that discipline equals freedom. The fact that if you know what you have to do, there's basic expectations. Right now, I still have them written on the wall. Literally. There's literally a spot where you can see it in multiple places exactly what the expectations are, right? This is the in essence, the standard operating procedure, right? And if you don't follow that, then you get pulled out of whatever you're doing and have to complete that task.
Yep.
If you had just come in and done it and just did it on your own accord without having to be, the expectation is that it's done, then you lose freedom because you are then told and harped on until it's done. Right? So this is a lesson in just do what's expected of you at the bare minimum, and then you have complete freedom to do whatever you want.
Yes.
Like this is life, man. So if you can't pay your bills, if you can't live your life, if you can't do this on a basic set, everything's going to get interfered with because people want their shit done. Mm-hmm. Real simple concept, right?
Well, it's
hard, again, simple, not easy necessarily.
It's not, yes.
But at the end of the day, it is really. You just have to do it. It's got to become, so it's working on that discipline, that self-discipline to be able to do those things. And with that, you gain so much time-wise, even like literal functional time that you're not burdened with going back and doing it again.
Well, and I think it's
doing it again.
I think it's the ability and willingness to recognize that it is within your control and not just cast and not be, and I guess, what's the better word? Recognizing it is within your control and not allowing yourself to become a victim. Right. So
not allowing it to slide.
Yeah. So here's a story. So, and I may have told you this story a long time ago. I don't remember. So when I was in I don't have a whole lot of basic training stories because it happened so long ago, but this is the one basic training story that always plays out in my mind.
Right.
So when I first got there, right, I mean, I didn't have a whole lot of structured discipline growing up. I didn't really have a lot of people telling me what to do, when to do it. I mean, I didn't really play sports. I didn't have like coaches. So, I mean, I kind of missed out on a lot of that growing up. So when I joined the military and all of a sudden I got a very quick and loud dose of that, I was completely beside myself. But so I was in base training, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, 1996, young whippersnapper, 19 years old. And all of a sudden I got these, people screaming at me to do this and that and the other thing. And I struggled, man. I really, honestly, really questioned myself many times going through that process, why the hell I even decided to join, because I just didn't think it was for me. I just couldn't conform. I struggled. But anyway, so there was a lot of things about basic training that I really disliked at the beginning. Like I'd end up, so the way it works is they have like a drill pad underneath the building, the barracks that you stayed in. It was like almost like a breezeway underneath the building, right? And that's where everybody formed up for formation in the morning before you'd march to chow or you'd march to training or you'd march to wherever you had to go. And so, you had time limits and you had, places to be and a certain time to be there and only had so many minutes to do X, Y, Z, the deal. And so, and the way it worked is as soon as you got done, as soon as you woke up and showered and made your bed, did everything, got dressed and got downstairs into the breezeway, you start to form up for formation. So if you're down there early, then you end up standing essentially to the far right of the formation towards the front because you fill in, left to right, front to back until the whole formation is formed. And then you right face and you begin marching. And so if you get there early, you end up at the front of the formation. But if you end up getting there late, you end up in the back of the formation. And the problem with being in the back of the formation is you have this, when you're marching, you end up with this accordion effect, right? So you're either like marching in place or you're running to catch up. Marching in place, running to catch up. Meanwhile, at the beginning of the formation, everybody just walking in a steady pace, leisurely stroll, I guess you could call it. But in the back of the formation, you're constantly just yo-yo effect, and it sucked. Hated it. And of course, you got to be in time, in step, otherwise you're getting your ass chewed. So trying to stay in step and try to stay in formation, doing this stop and go. It's like in traffic. It's very similar in traffic. You're stop and go and stop and go and stop. It's just nauseating, right? So I hated that about formations. And then when you get to chow, If you're all the way in the back, that means you're one of the last ones to go through and eat. And everyone gets the same, chow starts for your company, your platoon, starts and stops at a particular time. So if you get in there early, then you have more time to eat. If you get in there last, you've got very little time to eat. And, they don't wait for you to get done. The time is up, that's it. You throw away whatever's on your plate and you go. And so here I am, I'm doing this accordion yo-yo bullshit that I can't stand. And then I get there and I barely have any time to eat, and half the time I don't even get to finish my food. And a lot of the food that you end up getting is, not as fresh. You end up kind of with some leftovers, whatever they have left over in the pan, the bottom of the barrel, right? And it's just so many negative things about being in the back. And I lived in a place of victimhood for quite a while, for a few weeks, right? I just hated the fact that I was in the back of the formation, hated the fact that I didn't get time to eat, hated the fact that the food that I got was, bottom of the bucket, hated woe is me, poor me, right? And then one day it clicked. I noticed that it was always the same guys in the front, and not only that, but the guys that are in the front and they're more consistent, those are also like the platoon leaders and the squad leaders, and they get to make more of the decisions, right?
Because they fucking showed up.
Right. And so I'm like, okay, so these guys have it, basic training sucks for everybody, but on the scale of suckness.
Yeah, there's those little nuggets that you can take.
Their suck factor was less than mine, right? And
it's those little tiny things.
Yes. And so I asked myself, once I noticed this, like, why is it that these guys are always up front? Why are these guys always in charge? Why are these guys, right? And why am I always in the back? Why am I always taking the shit of everything? And I started to realize that the reason why I was suffering from all of the sucky shit and those guys weren't, or sucking less, I guess, is because they made it to formation before I did.
Yeah.
Right?
Something's that simple, right?
That simple, right. And I'm like, okay, so we all live in the same barracks. We all have the same amount of time to do the same things that we all have to do. How is it that these guys are able to do it faster than I am? And so I changed that. I had a moment of clarity where I decided to stop being the victim, because I could have just gone the rest of the time and basically been like, fuck it, this is just the way that it is, woe is me, my life sucks, right? But I decided to take extreme ownership and realize and try to get to the root cause of why my life was sucking more than these guys' lives were sucking. Mm-hmm. And so I started to, doing that self-reflection. I started in order to really get to the solution. I had to admit that I was the problem, and I wasn't just the victim. Right? I was doing it to myself. It wasn't happening to me. Right?
And then you had to prioritize and execute.
Yeah. Once I was in that mindset, and once I finally made that mind shift, and I realized that it was something I was doing to myself, because to admit that it was something that I was doing to myself is to admit that it was my fault. I was the reason for this, right?
That you suck.
That I sucked, right? Not that it was being imposed on me, but I was the result of this myself.
Right.
So my mind, as soon as my mind shifted, I was able to see how it happened, right? And I noticed that these guys were more efficient with their time. Mm-hmm. Instead of going back and forth between the bathroom and their bunk, they would bring everything with them the first time, and they would, shit, shower, shave all at one time. Instead of me, I'd be like, I'd run back to my bunk and grab my toothbrush, and I'd go and brush my teeth, and I'd run back and grab my shaving cream and my razor, so I was killing time. And so I started to look at these guys who are always first, and I was learning how their behavior was different than my behavior, right? And I started to mirror and mimic what their behavior.
Right.
So if they got up, on the first call, I got up on first call. If they went to and did a shower first before the showers were full, and instead of making their bed first, like, it was just the the order of things that they did it, and how they were able to maximize the time limit that they had. I just mirrored exactly what they did. And did I get as good as they did at first? No, but I noticed that day after day after day, the more I observed and the more I worked at it, the more I put my ego aside and said and admitted to myself that the things that I was doing wasn't working, and the ways that these guys are doing it is better. As long as, and I became okay with that fact, then I got better, and I noticed I can measure my progress by where I was in formation every day. So I gradually, and it didn't happen overnight. It took several days to finally make my way to the front of the formation. And then once I got consistently started getting to the front of the formation, my life started to improve. I didn't have to live with the stop and go traffic of being in the back of the formation. I didn't have to eat my breakfast and lunch and dinner in half the amount of time that I was before. I didn't have to live with the scraps left over at the bottom of the bucket.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? So yeah,
yeah,
so it
and
still
this, you
sucked.
can totally equate this to life too, as all kinds of things. But
Welcome back, sir.
welcome back.
We're picking up.
Holy fuck, that's loud.
We're picking up chapter 2 of Extreme Ownership. There are no
By
bad
Jocko Willink.
like Jocko Willink and Leif.
Leif, sorry, Jesus, I did it this week. Leif Babin.
It's actually the same week because we're dropping this audio at the end of the last recording. So for our listeners, it's all seamless. Leif,
well, I don't know if seamless is the word to describe anything we do, but
touche. Jocko Willink, Leif Babin, chapter 2. This is an interesting chapter. No bad teams, only bad leaders. What'd you think of the chapter, man?
I think it's awesome. I think I totally agree with my new frame of thinking. After reading this book, I mean, once you read the chapter, you totally understand what he means by that.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that other people don't take responsibility for stuff. But as a leader, ultimately, you take responsibility for everything that happens underneath you. I mean, you know what I'm saying. Within reason, let's not take this to a crazy thing, because people do. People take it to crazy town where they're like, well, what about this? Or what about this? Or what if?
Right.
Stop. Just knock it off. They explain this very well in the chapter. So just read it or listen to it. It's an amazing thing. I totally agree with it. And it's actually changed the way that I approach the work that I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm. So they were at Bud's, right? And this was after Jocko spent some time, or Leif spent some time in Ramadi, Iraq. Ended up going back to train the incoming SEALs, Buds.
He was he the officer in charge, or was he like a class officer or something like that?
Yeah. Jocko
was in charge.
He was like
no.
Oh, you're talking about Leif?
Yeah, Leif.
Yeah,
Leif was.
Jocko was put in charge of the overall command of the training. He was like the, whatever you call it, like the top dog, right? And,
but that wasn't at Bud's, though. It was at Tradoc.
Oh, it was Tradoc. Yeah. So this story is by Leif. So basically, in Bud's, you've all seen plenty of movies out there that's got like, the SEAL team boot camp, the Buds training, right? And they're jockeying around their little boats, right?
Yeah, and they get their asses kicked in Coronado.
Yeah, getting what's it called? Wet and sandy.
To say the least. So I have a lot of crossover here because of
You've done some of this?
Because of my recon experience.
Yeah.
In that training,
yeah.
It sucks balls.
So let me read some of this, and then we'll talk about it, and then I want to hear about your stories.
Oh, Jesus.
So basically there they were, right? The boat crew leaders raced back and briefed their boat crews, and then the race began. In place of the traditional ready, set, go, the SEAL command to begin was stand by, bust them. And they were off. In every race, there were standout performers. Throughout this particular Hell Week, one boat crew dominated the competition, Boat Crew 2. They won or nearly won every single race. They pushed themselves hard every time, working in unison and operating as a team. Boat Crew 2 had a strong leader, and each of the individual boat crew members seemed highly motivated and performed well. They compensated for each other's weaknesses, helped each other, and took pride in winning, which had its rewards. After each victory, Boat 2 crew enjoyed a few precious minutes of rest while their other boat crews toiled through the next race. Though Boat Crew 2 was still cold and exhausted, it saw smiles on most of their faces. They were performing exceptionally well. They were winning and morale was high. Meanwhile, on Boat Crew 6 was delivering a standout performance of a different kind. They placed dead last in virtually every race, often lagging far behind the rest of the class. Rather than working together as a team, the men were operating as individuals, furious and frustrated at their teammates. We heard them yelling and cursing at each other from some distance, accusing the others of not doing their part. Each boat crew member focused on his own individual pain and discomfort, and the boat crew leader was no exception. He certainly recognized that they were underperforming, but likely in his mind and that of his boat crew, no amount of effort could change that, and their horrific performance was the result. Boat Crew 6, you better start putting out, blared a SEAL instructor through his megaphone. Extra attention from the instructor staff had serious consequences. Our SEAL instructors were all over Boat Crew 6, dishing out punishment for their poor performance. As a result, the misery multiplied tenfold for Boat Crew 6. They were forced to sprint back and forth over the sand berm, down to the water and get wet and sandy, then bear crawl on blistered hands and feet. Next, they had to hold a boat at extended arm carry, with their arms fully extended overhead, supporting the full weight of the IBS which is their boat, until their shoulders were completely smoked. This punishment sapped every ounce of remaining strength from the already weary and demoralized boat crew. The boat crew leader, a young and inexperienced officer, was getting even more attention. As the leader, he bore the responsibility of his boat crew's poor performance, yet he seemed indifferent, as though fate had dealt him a poor hand. A team of underperformers who, no matter how hard he tried, simply could not get the job done. I kept my eye on the leader of Boat Crew 6. If he did not show substantial improvement in leadership ability, he would not graduate from the program. SEAL officers were expected to perform like everyone else, but more important, they were also expected to lead. And so far, Boat Crew 6's leader was demonstrating performance that was superb and that was subpar and unacceptable. Our SEAL Senior Chief Petty Officer, the most experienced and highly respected non-commissioned officer of the SEAL instructor cadre, took a keen interest in Boat Crew 6 and their lackluster leader. "You had better take charge of this and square your boat away, sir," said the Senior Chief to the Boat Crew 6 leader. Senior Chief was a Goliath of a man with piercing eyes that instilled fear equally into terrorists on the battlefield and students in training. An exceptional and reverent leader himself, he had mentored many young junior officers, and now Senior Chief offered an interesting solution to Boat Crew 6's atrocious performance. Now get this. This is what he says. He says, "Let's swap out the boat crew leaders from the best and the worst crews and see what happens," said Senior Chief. All other controls would remain the same. Heavy and awkward boats, manned by the same exhausted crews, cold water, gritty and chafing sand, wearied men competing in challenging races, only a single individual, the leader, would change. Could it possibly make a difference, I wondered? This is Leif speaking here now. The plan was quickly relayed to the SEAL instructors. Boat crew leaders from boat crews 2 and 6 report, blared the SEAL instructor through the megaphone. The 2 boat crew leaders ran over and stood at attention. You 2 will swap positions and take charge of the other's boat crew. Boat crew 6 leader, you are now leader of boat crew 2. Boat crew 2 leader, you are now leader of boat crew 6. Got it? Said the SEAL instructor. The boat crew leader from boat crew 2 was clearly not happy. I'm sure he hated to leave the team that he had built and knew well. No doubt he was proud of their dominant performance, and the new assignment to take charge of a poorly performing boat crew would be difficult and could potentially invite unwanted attention from the SEAL instructors. Still, he dared not to argue to the point with the instructors. With no choice, he accepted the challenging assignment with a look of determination. Boat Crew 6's leader was obviously elated. It was clear that he felt that only by the luck of the draw, and no fault of his own, he had been assigned to the worst boat crew of underperformers. In his mind, no amount of effort on his part could make Boat Crew 6 even any better. And now, the SEAL instructor directed him to take over Boat Crew 2. His face revealed his inner conviction that justice was finally being done, and his new assignment meant things would now be easy for him. Having received the direction to swap places, each boat crew leader went to his position in the opposite boat crew and stood by for the next race. As before, boat crew leaders were given instructions, and they in turn briefed their teams. Stand by, bust 'em, came the command, and they were off. We watched the boat crews sprint over the barrier of the berm carrying their boats, then hurried down to the surf zone and into the dark water. They jumped over the boats and paddled furiously. Passing through the crashing waves, they dumped the boat, got everyone back on board, and paddled down the beach. The headlights from the instructors' vehicles caught the reflection of the yellow bands painted around the boat rims. We could no longer see the boat numbers. However, 2 boats were ahead of the pack, almost neck and neck, with one vying for the lead. A half-mile down the beach, as the instructor trucks followed, the boat crews paddled back into shore. As the boats came on the headlights, the numbers were clearly visible. Boat Crew 6 was in the lead and maintained first place all the way across the finish line, just ahead of Boat Crew 2. Boat Crew 6 had won the race. A miraculous turnaround had taken place. Boat Crew 6 had gone from last place to first. The boat crew members had begun to work together as a team, and they won. Boat Crew 2 still performed well. Though they narrowly lost the race, they continued to challenge the Boat Crew 6 for the lead in the follow-on races. And each of these boat crews outperformed all the rest, with Boat Crew 6 winning most of the races over the better part of the next hour. It was shocking. It was a shocking turn of events. Boat Crew 6, the same team in the same circumstances, only under new leadership, went from the worst boat crew in the class to the best. Gone were the cursing and frustration, and gone too were the consistent scrutiny and individual attention they had received from the SEAL instructors. They had not witnessed this amazing had they not witnessed this amazing transformation, I might have doubted it. But it was glaring, undeniable example of the most fundamental and important truths about the heart of extreme ownership. There are no bad teams. There are only bad leaders. How is it possible that switching a single individual, only the leader, had completely turned around the performance of the entire group? The answer: leadership is the single greatest factor in any team's performance. Whether a team succeeds or fails, it is all up to the leader. The leader's attitude sets the tone for the entire team. The leader derives performance, or it doesn't. And this applies not just to the most senior leader in the overall team, but to the junior leaders of the teams within the team. That's amazing, dude.
It is crazy.
And you could say, you can make that prediction before they put it actually into practice, but to actually see it, You know what I mean? It's a whole nother level, bro. And it's
we've all kind of seen it.
You're right.
You have a story of a very, very good experience with something like this. Not the switching of leaders, but in essence it is because didn't they pile you with a ton of misfits?
Yeah, when I first
as a squad leader,
when I came back from Korea, I was assigned to the 1st Cav Division, back in the Colt platoon, Combat Observation Lazing Team, as Team 6. I started out on Team 6, and Team 6 at the time was 2 guys. As at the time I was not a senior squad leader, I was just a team chief, and I was given 2 guys. And their names were Pastor and Ford, and I was standing in formation my very first day. And the way they do it in the Army is you stand, in formation. So up front is Team 1, and Team 2 is behind them, Team 3 is behind them, all the way back to Team 6. And then in the morning you do your morning formation and you report out. So the platoon sergeant standing at the front of formation, and each of the team chiefs have to render a salute and basically announce, all present, or when
all presents are accounted for.
Right, and if they're not present and accounted for, then you got to basically say, I got one at sick call, or whatever the case may be. So here at my very first day, and I'm standing there, and I look to my left where both of my guys should be standing, and neither one of them are there. So I'm like, okay. So it gets to me, and I render my salute, and I say, Team 6, 2 men AWOL.
I don't have a fucking clue where they're at.
No idea. So that was a very embarrassing first formation for me, and I was pissed beyond recognition. And so I got done with morning formation. We're done with our PT, and I started asking around, like, who in the hell are these guys, and where do they live? And one of the team chiefs, he says, he goes, they both live in the barracks, but nobody knows where Pastor is, and Ford is in his room. And I'm like, okay. So I went and figured out what room Ford was in, and I went and knocked on the door, and he opens up the door, and he goes, yeah? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, yeah, who are you? And I'm like, I'm your new team chief. I was like, are you Ford? And he goes, yeah. And I was like, where were you this morning for PT? He goes, I felt like sleeping. I'm like, and so that was his attitude. And I'm like, okay. Well, I started asking around about where Pastor was, and he was legit like AWOL, like he had left the unit and was gone for a while.
Yeah, nobody had seen him in like 2 days.
Yeah, and like he is like finally about 3 days later, I get a phone call from my platoon sergeant, and he tells me that Pastor is I'm in Fort Hood, Texas, and apparently Pastor was coming back from somewhere and made it to like Austin, Texas, but that's all the further he was able to make it, and he ran out of money, so he needed me to go pick him up. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? So I went home, I told my wife, I said, I got to go to Austin, and I got to pick up one of my guys that I've never met yet that's been AWOL this whole time. And my wife's like, oh, I'm coming for this. So we hopped in the car, her and I, we drove down to Austin, and turns out, he decided he was going to wait for me at a bar because he needed a drink, apparently. So, found the bar that he was at and walked in, and he just kind of like, hey, how you doing? I was just like, you don't know me very well. You don't know me at all. It's the first time we met. I'm like, I'm not fucking happy. Get your ass in the car. So he gets in the car, and he doesn't say a fucking word all the way back to Fort Hood. And so here I am. I've got basically one guy that just doesn't give a fuck, and another guy that gives a fuck even less. And now I'm supposed to like be their team chief, right? I'm just like, this is just bullshit.
But one of the things, I don't know about reality, but the multiple times that we've talked about this, you didn't like hammer him. I mean, like, not right off the bat.
No.
Like, you weren't like get in the fucking push-up position, bitch, when you talk to me, or
no,
you didn't dress him down and belittle them.
No,
No, which is huge.
No, I didn't, but I wanted to.
Of course you did want to, but that can't be the first impression.
No, I wasn't happy, but
and you at least knew that though.
Well, I wasn't happy, but I'm the new guy. I'm new too, right? So
right.
I'm still trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And I walk into this situation. These guys have been in unit for a while, and they've got a reputation, and I don't. And so I'm just trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And they both know that I'm not happy at all with their performance thus far, and I made no qualms about letting them know that. But so the long story short is, instead of being like the guy in this story, instead of being the boat 6 team chief and just being like, oh man, I received a shitty hand, and I did. They basically threw the worst guys in the platoon together on one team.
Well, that's perception, right?
Oh, well, that was legit. The apparently the NCO that was there ended up going to another unit, and no other team chief wanted to deal with these guys. Right,
and it's like maybe because of what? It's like why though? I understand that they've had that those guys, weren't the best performers per se,
yeah,
right?
Right.
But again, a good leader can figure out what he's working with. Yeah. And what I'm saying is that you got to a point where you figured out what made these guys tick,
mm-hmm.
and the next thing you know, you guys are kicking ass and taking names.
Well, and that was the thing is I think the previous leader didn't do a lot of trying to figure out what made the guys tick, right?
No, exactly, and that's what it comes down to. So it's I love this this idea, right? And the only good there's only bad leaders, not bad teams, right? So when leaders who epitomize extreme ownership drive their teams to achieve a higher standard of performance, they must recognize that when it comes to standards as a leader, it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate.
That's right.
So when setting expectations, no matter what has been said or written, if substandard performance is accepted and no one is held accountable, if there's no consequences, that poor performance becomes the new standard.
Mm-hmm.
So what I suspect is that it got to a point where a leader was like, fuck it, I'm done with you guys.
Yep.
Instead of actually trying to lead, he threw up his hands and was like, fuck it. And then that substandard performance, it's just like, it's the same thing with parenting. If you just say, fuck it, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't deal with you guys right now. And you never come back to revisit what happened.
Right.
Your kids are going to keep pushing that envelope.
Yeah, but that becomes the new standard, right?
That becomes the new standard, right? So
right.
As long as you delineate clear standards, and that's what you had done,
mm-hmm.
you finally did that. You had those SOPs that we were talking about in chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
You've got those standard operating procedures, and this is the base. It never falls below here, and if it does, there's consequences.
Right.
Like you will be doing extra duty, or you will be digging a foxhole on Saturday.
Yep.
Because we're gonna learn what discipline means. We're gonna learn what this does, and it comes back to that concept that Jocko puts forward, that discipline is freedom.
Mm-hmm. And
in the military, that's huge.
And I was at the time. I mean, I was just I hadn't even made staff sergeant. I was just a sergeant, and here's my thinking at the time. I was a very selfish NCO because I wanted to be the best, right? But I also knew that I couldn't be the best unless my guys were also the best, right? Because that's the beautiful thing about being a non-commissioned officer in the military is you're not judged just on your own ability or inability, but you're very much judged by the ability or inability of your men, right? And I knew that, and so
what do we always say? You're only as good as your weakest man.
Yeah, that's right. And so I basically said, I'm not giving up on these guys because this was the team I was given. I didn't choose them. I came into, that was the team that they had an NCO position available, and that's the team that I inherited. And this kind of goes to anyone, and it doesn't have to be military, but you could come into a corporate team and be a manager, supervisor, executive, whatever the case, and you'll, and more times than not, very few leaders in an organization have the ability to build their own team. In most cases, they're inherited a team, right? To come into a team or a new company, and here you go. You're now the new procurement manager, or you're the new director of IT, or you're the new HR manager, whatever the case may be. And here's your team. They've been here before you, and you don't get to pick your team. You inherit a team. And
oftentimes in corporate America, a lot of those team members were at one point probably your peers,
right?
Which gives you a whole nother layer of, we get that in the military too, but a lot of times they were your peers,
right? Yep, and that's hard too, right? Mm-hmm. So and that's the thing is I realized that I wasn't gonna get my say in who my team was. This was my team, and my decision to do what I did next was driven by the fact that I knew I wasn't getting another team. And so I basically decided right then and there that I didn't care what these guys' performance was before I got there, that they're the new team for me, right? They're my team, and I'm their new leader, and I'm going to do whatever I have to do to make these guys successful. And that's the thing, right? If I come at it from a place of I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this team a successful team, then that gives me the opportunity to be successful. But if I had come at it with a place of like this boat crew 6 chief, or the boat crew leader of Team 6, he was very much like, he felt like he was the victim, right? That he was dealt a bad hand, and he was given this shitty team
there, right?
Yeah.
It's
him, right.
And at the end of the day, it's not about you.
Mm-hmm.
It's about your team. And
right.
If you concentrate on what your team, because that's what leadership is. That's what, managing things is. And I'm not talking micromanagement. I'm talking about leadership, right? So
that's right.
That's what it's about, though. If you stop focusing on what they're doing to you, focusing on what you're doing to them.
Exactly right.
And if you can do that and take yourself out of the equation, but you have to set the standard.
Mm-hmm.
That includes the way that you act, the way that you do your job, the way that you show up on time. We've had this conversation millions of times, because we're both in the business of helping people get jobs. In essence, you're not as much right anymore, but yet you still do this with veterans.
Yeah.
So what do we always say? There's 4 things that an employer wants. And as a leader, these are the basics. These are the base standards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's literally communicate effectively, being able to communicate effectively, both written and verbally, right?
Yep.
Showing up on time. Just show up. Show up ready to work. On time. Being trainable. Open to education, open to the fact that you don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the 4th? Do you remember? Jesus, I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to say, we talk about it all the time. And I can't fucking remember it. Showing up on time, communicating. Playing well with others.
Yeah, working well with others. Yep.
Working well with others. Being part of a team. Yep. That you're able to do that. It's those 4 things. If you can do those 4 things, you'll be successful, period. In everything that you do. As long as, in business, usually.
Right.
If you can concentrate on that as a base, and that's what a leader expects. Mm-hmm. And if the leader does that effectively, then his employees should. So, you know what I'm saying? Setting the standard.
Yeah.
Kind of went off a little bit on the side there, but either way. It's just like life lessons that I've learned and that you've learned in,
and I think
20 years of business shit.
And I was lucky enough to have a couple of guys that were able to, I said, all right, guys, at the end of the day, I don't really give a shit about anything that happened in the past. Like, the past is the past. If you're willing to start fresh with me, then we're going to do this, and we're going to do it right. And they agreed. It was slightly reluctant at first, but they were just like, okay,
because they didn't
fine.
trust you.
Right, because they didn't trust you. That's right. It took a lot of effort on my part to build that trust, but it started off with the little things, right? It started off with let's show up to formation on time. Let's make sure that our rooms are
your
clean.
uniform's squared away.
Right. Yeah, it's the little things, right?
Our rooms are clean.
We build on that, and it got to the point where we had opportunities to, attend some field training exercises and kind of show our skills and ability. And every year they have what's called it's a competition. It's a fister competition. It's called Red Team Stakes.
God, I hate that they call you guys fisters.
Fisters, yes. So the Red Team.
Well, who the fuck came up with that? I'm sorry.
It's an acronym. Fire support.
I know
teamers.
it is. I'm just saying, who decided that was a good acronym? Had to have been in like the 30s or something, 40s. When that meant something different, or should I say, didn't mean what it means now?
Right. Yes.
Because now you're fucked. Like your symbol's cool. You got like a, it looks like the freaking Infinity Gauntlet on a dude's freaking hand.
Yeah, man.
Fister with like a lightning bolt coming out of it. It's like very, very Thorish. And then you see Fister, and you're like, wait a minute.
That's right.
It's like a joke. This is a joke, right? No, this is fucking real. Oh, Jesus. That was one of my things. That was one of my coming from the Marine Corps into the Army.
Yeah.
Just to go off on a little comedic tangent. That was one of the things I was like, are you fucking kidding me? We call them fisters.
It is when you first hear it, you're like, okay, this is weird.
Well, it becomes a term of endearment after that, but you're
absolutely.
still like, get the fuck out of here, fister. What the fuck do fisters do?
So every year we have a competition, and the way it works is it starts at the lowest level. So you compete at your platoon level, so each of the teams compete against each other, right? And it's an annual competition, and everything is graded. You start out with a PT test, then you go to the TISFO. You familiar with the TISFO, the training center where you call for fire?
Yes.
Right?
Well, I mean, not in the Army, but yes.
Yeah. So you go, and it's like a screen where they pop up the bad guys, and you got to call for.
Well, I guess at Drum we had this. Once we did it, once I got into the Army, once I did some leadership training, like team leader, squad leader training.
Yeah.
We finally went to. They had one of those huge. It was like a terrain map. Right?
Yep.
But like actual 3D terrain map of a fictitious land. And what we would do is they had, guys in a booth. One was CAS, one was, direct fire.
Yep.
And we would call for fire and mortars. We'd call mortars, we call whatever. And you could actually, not shit wasn't blowing up.
Right.
But, like the red laser stuff.
Yeah.
Do you remember doing that stuff on tables like that? I always thought that was so much fun.
Yeah,
it was one of my favorite things to do.
Train board. Yeah.
Yep. And then to do it live and in person, I remember calling. Now this is going to date me on my time in the Marines, but we were calling in close air support from A6s.
Oh Jesus!
But let me tell you, when an A6 comes in low and hot,
yeah.
That shit'll burn your ass. Those fucking guys, man. And they don't care. Like, they're flying so low, and those jets are so loud. Like, way louder than other things.
Yeah.
And they can carry a load, and they'll drop that shit hot. It's fucking... it's pretty fucking fun. Just saying.
Yeah. So we competed at the team level, and we ended up winning for our platoon. And then we would compete.
People were probably like, what the fuck?
Yeah, they were. And that's the thing is they didn't really see us as as a contender in the competition, and we just kind of smoked everybody, and so we won our team, and then we had to compete at our battalion level with the other Fister teams, and we ended up winning our battalion, right? And the next level was to then compete against the other battalion winners from the other battalions within the Divardi Division Artillery. And the winner of that was basically, that's called Red Team Stakes. So the winner of that is like the best in the entire division artillery, for the best Fister team of the entire division, right? And so I ended up winning the team, ended up winning our battalion, and so now my team was eligible to go and compete against the other battalions for the Red Team Stakes. And I was pulled into like the Sergeant Major's office, right? And I was told, I was like, he says, all right, you're going to the Divardi competition. I'm like, Roger that, Sergeant Major. And he says, you could pick any of the, you could pick your team, basically. Anybody that I wanted from any of the other platoons, any of the other teams within the battalion, I could basically handpick my team to compete. And I was like, Roger, I'll take my team. I'm good. And he's like, no, I don't think you understand. He goes, you can pick any team in the battalion or any guys in the battalion to take with you to Red Team Stakes. And I'm like, Roger that. I'm going to take my two guys, the guys that I won, up to this point with. And he's like, I don't think you understand. He goes, let me break it down for you. He goes, we really want to win Red Team Stakes. And I was like, no, I got it. I really want to win Red Team Stakes also. But if it's up to me, if it's okay with you, I want to do it with my team. And he kept pushing the issue, and I was like, okay, here's the deal. If I don't get to take my team, Sergeant Major, then you're gonna have to find another NCO to go to Red Team Stakes. Because I don't want to compete unless it's with my guys. And he goes, okay, I'm trusting you, but I want to win. I was like, well, if you want to win, give me my guys, and we'll win. And he goes, that's a tall order. I was like, I know. So I kind of pulled my guys aside, and I was like, hey, man, I kind of, without giving them the whole story, because I didn't want them to know that the Sergeant Major didn't have a lot of faith in their ability to compete. I was just like, hey, I just got done talking to Sergeant Major, and he's basically said, we got to do whatever we got to do to win this thing. And they're like, yeah, let's do this. And so I told him, man, it's gonna take a lot on our part to commit to this. It's like, if you're in, you're in all the way. That means weekends, staying late, doing whatever we got to do to get ready to compete. And he goes, yep. They're like, they both agreed, we're in. So we ended up, when everybody else went home on Friday afternoon at 4:00, we stayed and we went over, everything. We did extra PT. We set up OE254 antennas and timed ourselves. We read through the 6-30, which is the Forward Observer Manual. We went to the TISFO when no one else did and practiced more call for fires. Like we were basically given carte blanche to do whatever we wanted to do. Like I basically didn't even have to show up for normal formation in the morning. I basically took my guys and we did whatever we wanted to do leading up to the Red Team Stakes. And then when we finally competed in the Red Team Stakes, it's a 3-day event. And after the first day, we were so far ahead in points that we basically didn't have to participate in the other 2 days events, and we still would have won. So we still participated in the other 2 days events, but we were so far ahead in the lead of points from the events of day one that, yeah, man, it was pretty much it was a slam dunk for us. Ended up coming back and, getting awards and names on a plaque and all that fun stuff that comes with being a winner. But what ended up happening is the attitude of my guys from that point forward changed a lot because they now had to maintain that level of that standard that they had set for themselves, like we just talked about, right? We just set a new standard. And so there was no showing up late for formation. There was no going AWOL. There was no showing up, with a shitty looking uniform. I mean, these guys basically prove to the world that they were the best team in the entire division, and which is awesome. But now we had to live up to it, right? Every single day, everything that we did, we had to prove and maintain that we were the best, because it was that one competition, said that we were the best, but you know how you actually are the best is you maintain that every single day. And it's hard sometimes because you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to be perfect. But as long as you're always coming back to center, the best that you can, then you'll always be winning in my book. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Got it. That shit's awesome. I just thought that would be a good story.
Yeah, it is a good story. And I think
But it also shows, there's no such thing as a bad team. There's just bad leaders. So you gave them you created a space for them to flourish.
Yeah.
You figured out how to get into their heads. You figured out how to motivate them, because I'm sure it was different than other soldiers that you had.
Yeah.
Or maybe your ignorance in leadership was your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like the guys that, like you come into boot camp, and I use this analogy a lot. I used it with women and men, teaching people to shoot. It's easier to teach someone to shoot that's never shot.
Right.
And so maybe it's a symbol of ignorance is bliss. But, you still have to have that base in the Jesus Lord, because you have patience. And patience is a huge virtue for leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that you have. You've proven that over and over and over again. In your personal life as well as your professional life. So,
and that's not easy. That's a learned skill, man.
It is. No, it absolutely is. Absolutely. Like, you have to figure out how to get through it, and without screaming and nothing. I mean, and I fail daily at it. I have a lot of patience, but definitely learned. Unfortunately, I have less patience with my children than I do with the people I deal with on a daily basis. It's like I give it all at work, so I'm not freaking the fuck out.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't have by the end of the day, my give a fucks are gone.
Right.
So that's unfortunate. That's my big thing lately, is I'm working on just being way more patient with my kids.
Yeah.
But again, skill for sure.
And I think I've been guilty of that myself. I'm glad that you're sharing that vulnerability on this podcast, because it's something that I think a lot of people listening to this deal with, and I do too. I am, on occasion, I will use up all of my patience with the people that I deal with at work, and then I come home and I don't carry that same level of patience sometimes.
Yeah, you're like, you should fucking know. But again, you're making it about you, not about them.
Right.
Right? Not about your team, because your family's your team.
Right, exactly.
At the end of the day, your family is the team that matters.
Yep.
Right?
That's right.
And you should, what is the saying? Where usually you're nice to basically everybody except for your family, the ones that you love the most, or what, what I'm saying?
It's the ones you love the most, you tend to hurt the deepest.
Yes, and that's just fucked. That's not good leadership. Just saying. Right? And that's right. And that's a learned behavior. So that comes from somewhere.
Right.
So.
Yeah, man. I think it's an incredible chapter. If you haven't gotten this book, highly recommend you get the book or listen to it on Audible. I've got both, Audible and a hard copy. No bad teams, only bad leaders. And it starts with the leader recognizing that, it's if your team's failing, first person you should be looking at is yourself. Absolutely. And sometimes that's a difficult thing to admit that your team's failing because of you, that you're the reason your team is failing. And the other thing, too, is as I've been listening to a book by Brene Brown, and that might be another book that we talk about at some point, and she talks about this concept of coming at things, assuming positive intention, right?
Yeah.
Assuming, and that's something it's kind of, it's like to hear it, you're like, yeah, that's a no brainer. But then to put it into practice, it's a whole nother deal, right? But assuming positive intention, like whenever you go to work and your team seems like it seems like they're going out of their way to just fuck shit up, right?
Yes, right.
Like, it's like you gotta stop and ask, okay, assume positive intention. Assume that they're not trying to fuck it up, right? Assume assume that they're actually trying really hard to not fuck it up. Like, what does that mean then, right? If you were to assume positive intention, the way you look at it from the leader's perspective is going to change, right? So, and that's, so, like I said, easier said than done, and it takes you got to be an active participant in that, right? You've got to be able to say, okay, all right, whenever those feelings start to pop up in your head, like, oh man, my team is just out there trying to screw shit up.
Yeah,
Like,
they're not trying to fucking.
right. It's like,
they're not trying to fuck me.
It's like when your boss gives you like a task to do, and you think that that's like stupid. You got to ask yourself, like, is my boss intending for me to fail? Does my boss want me to fail? No. Okay. Does my boss want to succeed as in this business? Does my boss want us to have positive growth and do right by our customers and be more profitable and gain market share and improve relations with stakeholders? Like, all those answers to all those questions is yes. So if my boss is generally wanting the best for me and for the company, then coming at a task that he's now given me, I'm coming at it from a different light now, right? Instead of just saying to myself, oh, he's trying to, like, he doesn't get it, or
that's an excuse.
Right, it's absolutely an excuse.
And a lot of people do that shit. Like, they'll look at a situation and they'll just make excuses on why they failed instead of actually looking in the mirror.
Absolutely.
Right? So
yep.
that's the moral of that.
Right.
That it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What is it that we've talked about this before, but it's like it doesn't matter that whether or not you did it. It matters because it affects you. It does affect your life. So you have to take responsibility for at least the part that affects you, and how do you make it not happen again? Right? So like if you, like your team doesn't meet a goal, well then you didn't pay enough attention to all the other things. You know what I mean? Like there's things that, especially as a leader, right? You've got to be on all the details. Mm-hmm. Not micromanaging them, but be aware. Like, have reports and people, keep you, hey, if you've got trouble, seriously, there's no reflection upon you. Just let me know and I'll help. Right. I've done that with coworkers, and a lot of times that helps. It's like, listen, I'm really good at the part that you're not. So let me help you. Right. And but again, that's why it's important. That's leadership within an entrepreneurial type setting, right? Yeah, where you know what affects your world, and you affecting leadership upon the things around you. Not bossy, not trying to be the boss, but actual assistance and adding value, right?
Yep.
To the people and things around you. And if you can do that, you'll be an invaluable team member. That's leadership within a team.
Well, that's the thing is, let me ask, some people that are listening to this are saying, you know what, Bennett, that's great. I understand what you guys are saying, but, I'm not a manager at work. I'm not a supervisor at work. I'm an individual contributor. So this doesn't really have anything to do with me.
Well, I just showed you the instance where it does.
Right. Everyone within a team is a leader of in and of themselves.
Because if a deadline isn't met, how did you not? How is your part of the pie, or how could you have helped the deadline being met?
Right.
Because again, it's a matter of a team knowing each other's strengths and knowing each other's weaknesses, not as a leader, but as a team member. Because what's one of the things? This is something else that came up in this chapter that we haven't touched on, is knowing your counterparts and your leader's job. What is it? 2 steps above?
Yeah.
Yeah, that you should at least have. You should have a very good
yeah.
understanding of your leader. If you had to step into your boss's job, could you do it? You should know that.
Right.
Right. So at the very least, you should know your boss's job and have a pretty good understanding of one step higher. Right.
Yeah, I tell my folks one step up and 2 steps below where they're at. They should know inside and out.
Right. So there you go with the 2 steps below part, is that you know the job, but you should also know what's going on within your team. You should know your team members. I mean, it's one of those things, but it's called personal relationships with people that you work with. Maybe you should have enough trust with that person that you know that their grandmother just died and that it's really affecting them. Right?
Yeah.
But how many of us don't know those things?
Right.
So it's a matter of, if you're going to be a team, be a team. Like, have that. And you know what? Teams that are led by a leader that participates in this theory of extreme ownership will probably have that. And if you don't have it now, that's probably a reflection on the actual health of your team. Just saying.
One of the tools that I've used since beginning in corporate to help understand, because we talk often about introspection and understanding your own self, right? Where you come from, what are your natural tendencies, and it's not an intuitive thing, right? You've got to go and seek that out to figure that out. One of the tools that I was turned on to several years ago, but I still continue to use today, and that's DISC profile, DISC. And I know we've talked about it briefly in some other shows that we've done, and maybe we can get into it again in greater detail. But the DISC profile, it's very similar to a lot of those other personality type assessments that you can do online. But the DISC profile really gets granular in terms of what your natural resting motivators and tendencies are.
Yep.
And I'm a very results-driven individual at the resting state. And so sometimes, to Bennett's point in talking about getting to know your people, sometimes that's not the first thing on my mind, right? Sometimes I'm not concerned about what my employees' personal family life's like, because from a results-oriented or results-driven mindset, I'm looking at, execution and results within the organization. So sometimes it's difficult for me to remember that, the people that work for me, they're actually human beings too, and they have lives outside of the office, and they've got things that they're not working on from a work perspective that they do care about, right? And so that just becomes part of having some self-awareness and learning and knowing more about yourself. And has been successful in being able to learn that by using the DISC profile. So if you haven't heard of that, highly recommend you go check it out. Just Google DISC, D-I-S-C. It is an acronym. The price of it's gone up. When I took it, it was about $30 to take the test. I think it's probably closer to like $50, $60 now.
So and DISC is a really good one because it does get granular. The other one that gets more, there's the Braxton Hicks stuff that's on. There's a couple different ones that are free online, but they don't get as granular. Right. And they're kind of cookie cutter. But like DISC and then Extreme, the Strengths 2.0. Yeah. That's another really good one. Strength Finder, sorry. Strength Finder 2.0 is really good too because it gets down to it.
I think the free ones are good, but the free ones are gonna.
They're just an overview.
Well, that's the free ones to me. They're like reading your horoscope.
Yes, kind of. Yes, right? They are because there is only like 10 different things, and there's no actually most of us are blends of 2 or 3. Right. Right. Personality types, and here's the other thing: just because you took a personality type when you were 20, at 40, take another one.
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
Probably different.
Yeah, it is. I guarantee you, it's different.
If people put yourself in this little box for your whole
Yeah.
life, and that happens a lot. I
Yeah.
think I want to leave. I'm my side of this. I'm going to kind of read this one paragraph and leave it with that. All right.
Okay.
So once a culture of extreme ownership is built into the team at every level, the entire team performs well, and performance continues to improve when a strong leader is temporarily removed from the team. That happened with Team 2 and Team 6, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the battlefield, preparation for potential casualties plays a crucial role in team success if a key leader should go down. But life can throw any number of circumstances in the way of any business or team. And every team must have junior leaders ready to step up and temporarily take on the roles and responsibilities of their bosses to carry on the team's mission and get the job done, if and when the need arises. Leaders should never be satisfied. They must always strive to improve, and they must build that mindset into the team. They must face the acts through a realistic, brutally honest assessment of themselves, introspection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their team's performance. Identifying weaknesses, good leaders seek to strengthen them and come up with a plan to overcome challenges. The best teams anywhere, like the SEAL teams, are consistently looking to improve, add capability, and push the standards higher. It starts with the individual and spreads to each of the team members until this becomes the culture, the new standard. The recognition that there's no bad teams, only bad leaders, facilitates extreme ownership and enables leaders to build high-performance teams that dominate on any battlefield, literal or figurative.
Mm-hmm.
Powerful shit.
Hell yeah, man. So
Yeah.
that's a great place to end on this on this discussion. It takes, at the end of the day, I'll leave with this, and that is, no matter what you do, if you're serious about leadership, it takes work. It doesn't come naturally. You've got to learn more about yourself, and you've got to learn more about your people, and you've got to be open to different ideas, different concepts, different ways of thinking. And, we often hear that whole think outside of the box, right? And again, that's a great concept, but it's much easier to say than it is to actually do. And you've got to be open to learning more about yourself. And sometimes that's hard, because sometimes we learn things about ourselves that are like, they're not awesome. Right?
They're not awesome. Everyone is awesome. Your opinion, just to close out with a pondering question: are leaders born or created?
I think leaders are developed. I don't think there's I don't agree with this whole, if it's not hereditary, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
I think people have certain things that are hereditary, like maybe your comfort level with speaking, in front of a crowd or something like that, right? I mean, being outgoing and being outspoken might help in certain situations, and that might come more naturally to some than others. But from terms of actual leading people and being a good leader, that's definitely something I think you've got.
Those are skills that are
skills that are learned. I think
Absolutely.
So. What do you think?
I agree. Yeah. I think there are people that are born with a propensity to leadership. I think some of that has to do with, if you look at anthropologically, if you look at men and at humans, right?
Yeah.
I think, a lot of times back in the day, the biggest and strongest were usually the leaders, right? And that's the way, but that doesn't mean they were good leaders. But I think it became more important in leadership as society became more complex, that leaders that could think,
mm-hmm.
And know these things. They know the knowledge, right? Wisdom.
Yeah.
And this is why I have an issue. It doesn't mean a 25-year-old kid can't be a good leader, but they don't have the wisdom. Like, usually the people that really thrive have good mentors, right?
True.
So it comes down to, you've got to know humility, and you have to know that you don't know everything.
Yep.
And there are certain skills that make you a better leader, and you need to develop those. And as long as you have that in mind, I think you'll progressively become a better leader through your whole life. And that should be your goal. So I think, again, it's twofold. I think some people are born with the propensity to be good leaders. Some people squander that because their ego gets in the way. Yeah. But then I think the people that actually want to be leaders and a good, effective leaders, just because you want to be a leader doesn't mean you're going to be a good leader. Right. You have to work at it. So I think that's my opinion. I think they're created, but I think it's a very complex situation, and people have to understand that leadership is a journey. It's not just something that happens. It's definitely a lifelong journey, and you've got to work at it. You've got to build the skills. You do. Grit, toughness, humility, patience. Those are all things. There's like 15 things, really. Mm-hmm. But yeah, man, that's my opinion. So
I agree.
Good
Absolutely
show.
A journey. Yeah, man.
All right, audience, we love you. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, and we'll be talking more about some of these chapters coming up, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
All right, man.
Until next time.